Thank you, Yasmin. I would like to extend my thanks to ERF for organizing this, for all the researchers that are here also supporting us, and for all of you who are attending and expressing an interest in this important subject. So this session will build on what Radia just presented, this overall view, so we'll get now into more nitty-gritty details. And for this, I'm very honored and I would say also humbled to be moderating this panel, who includes Dr. Atif Kubursi, who includes also Professor Ragui Assaad and Professor Bipasha, and also we have with us Mrs. Saker, Yusra. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to give a brief introduction for each of the panelists, and then I will invite Dr. Kubursi to present the research document that he penned, and then we'll go for a question session for the panelists, and then I'll give the floor to the audience to give their questions also. So let me introduce Dr. Kubursi, who's a professor emeritus of economics at McMaster University. He's also president of Econometric Research Limited. He had behind him a very rich career being at United Nations. And also, Professor Kubursi taught economics at Purdue University in Indiana and was a visiting scholar in Cambridge. The whole profile of Professor Kubursi can be accessed as well as for each of the panelists. Briefly, we also have Professor Assaad Ragui, who is Freeman Chair for International Economic Policy at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs of University of Minnesota. Professor Assaad had extensive research on youth and gender issues as they relate to education, transition from school to work. That's a very important subject after what Radia told us regarding the unemployment of youth in the Arab world, a scary number. So I'll move also to Dr. Bipasha Barua, who's professor and Canada Research Chair in Global Women Issues at Western University. So Professor Barua is a well and a very fertile producer of research. She's also our consultant when it comes to gender issue with IDRC. So Professor Barua supervises us and advises us on the gender issue for all our projects that we undertake, and hence her important presence with us and input today. And finally, last but not least, I would like to present Yusra Asaker from the World Bank, who will give us a flavor from a practitioner point of view, thanks to her career as a practitioner also. And also she will give us some feedback from her recent participation to the COP29, I guess. So we'll get also perspective from other fora about the work we do. Okay, so thank you all for being here with us. So without further ado, Professor Kubursi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghozlani, for your kind introduction. I'm sure my mother will be proud of you. It's very fitting to say that this project is one of the most unique projects I've worked on. It brought together a number of scholars from the region and from outside, the best and the brightest, and they worked very hard and worked collaboratively and worked in a very dedicated way, knowing fully well that this is not a transition to energy only. It became ultimately a social project for moving the MENA economy, the Arab economy, into a more productive, more inclusive, more sustainable economy. The issue was right from the beginning is that MENA faces many challenges. there are issues of climate change and the capacity of the countries to withhold and withstand and adapt to the calamitous consequences that this climate change is bringing to the region. It's one of the most exposed, vulnerable regions to the vast and disastrous results that are likely to come or has already come. We are already practicing, already experiencing some of the ravages of climate change. It's the issue also of an economy that's not very productive, has not been able to engender in its operations a move towards productive activities, depended on many respects on a rentier economy, the huge surplus oil that had bestowed on the region a mechanism and procedures and working conditions that were not very productive and had militated against the economies of the region to use efficiently, effectively their resources. It's also a situation where we have very high levels of unemployment, particularly youth and women unemployment. And we have also a situation where the political vulnerability of the region, the extent to which these socio-economic and geopolitical factors have created conditions that militated against, again, the capacity of the national economies and regional economy to make the best use of their resources and their talents and their abilities. And what happens is that we found out, and to our good fortune, that the transition to a renewable energy is not going to only address the issues of unclean environment, but it's going to create the very opportunity to rebase the economy or more productive and more inclusive and more vibrant conditions that are to the best interests of the region. And we found in many respects that despite the fact that the region is already experiencing some of the ravages of climate change, the temperature in the region has increased in the past few decades by 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 2 times higher than the global rise in temperature. It also is a situation in which the precipitation level, a region like ours, which is known and characteristically taken as an example of a region with the highest poverty level in terms of water. The World Bank defines water poverty to be 1,000 cubic meter per person per year. In the region, we're lucky to have 500, and in some of the countries of the region, it could be even less than 100, whether it's in Palestine or in the Gulf region. And the already having many disastrous climate episodes, whether it is landslides, even in Saudi Arabia and Gulf area, we have devastating floods, the like of which that never been experienced before and are not likely to be experienced. The precipitation level in Lebanon, Jordan, and Morocco and Tunisia have really been far less than have been in the past, and is beginning to constitute a major threat to water security, which translates automatically into food security equally too. The issue also that the region is perhaps, as we heard from the previous lecture, is fortunate to have the highest and the most rich reserves in fossil fuel. And to a great extent, the fact that 80% of anthropogenic disastrous consequences of burning fossil fuel in terms of global warming and climate change, there is no question, there is no escape. The only credible way to adjust to this would be to move off this disastrous dependence on fossil fuel, raising the prospect of this wealth becoming stranded assets. And there is now here a situation in which not only are we facing huge and very difficult circumstances and disasters, at the same time, we are losing a great source of wealth that we had depended on to finance and to promote economic social development. But at the same time, we are really facing a situation where we contribute so little. And some people have put it between 4 and 8% of the total global emissions, and yet we are likely to withhold and experience over 18 to 20% of the calamitous consequences, whether it is GDP loss or asset loss, or even affected people. The number of climate deaths in the region is twice as high as its proportion of the population. And things are likely to get even worse. And the story is, if we make this transition, what does it really carry? How is it likely to unfold? Who are the drivers? What are the basic benefits that we are likely to reap? And what are some of the barriers, some of the constraints that would withhold and will compromise our ability to make that smooth transition? And what we found out, that it's very interesting, is that our region, despite the fact that has the highest and most prolific wealth in terms of fossil fuel, if one can take this transition to renewable energy, we are so fortunate that our region is likely to be one of the most endowed in terms of ability to generate renewable energy. We have irradiation levels that are 10 times the global average. We have the space. One of the most important constraints about moving towards global green energy is that the space is not there for the panels, for the wind turbines. We are ultimately have a Rub al Khali and the huge amount of deserts, and instead of these being basically a liability, they are becoming a major asset. We are able to put our panels and wind and batteries and others in these areas in a way that no other region has that capacity or has this endowment. And what's even more interesting, and some have already suggested, that we can also develop the largest carbon sinks, because these could ultimately be stored in our land and could be a source of incredible amount of wealth that may not really be less than what the wealth we had in terms of oil and gas. And what is even more interesting is that transition to renewable energy creates multiple volumes and levels of employment and better jobs and more meaningful jobs than the one that we had generated by fossil fuel. The world is now, according to IRENA, the International Renewable Energy, is going to lose maybe 5 million jobs that are now currently working, producing fossil fuel, but they will gain 14 million jobs by making renewable energy. And there is no place where that combination of what we lose and what we gain is not in any place as fortunate as it's going to be in our region. And we found out that if we, and this is the second lecture we're going to give with Dr. Hala Abu Ali, that we are going to create millions of jobs. And there are so many channels where these jobs could really become available to us. And if we make a concerted effort and a planned effort and a commitment to make this transition, the capacity to gain these jobs, it would be incredible. And what's even more interesting is that renewable energy is not transportable or as easily transportable as gas and oil. Actually, $4 will take a barrel of oil worth $100 all over the world. It's not available to us in terms of renewable energy. But this, to a great extent, represents a new capacity. It seems that there are so many activities that need to be close to where the renewable energy is produced: metals, chemicals, petrochemicals. And these could really become a very important source of economic vitality and a diversified economy. The real prospect here is to diversify the economy, to spread the level of production and the type of production that would be guaranteed and would be supported by renewable energy is almost without bound. And we are really, as a region, given the fact that we have all this space and we're not going to worry about these limitation in space, it gives the opportunity to the region, the like of which did not exist. And what's even more interesting is that it's going to really help us create an inclusive structure of employment and income. Look, one of the major issues of the rentier economy is that it created a very unequal and a very polarized levels of employment. And sometimes, to a great extent, even employment that was not productive. Actually, there is in the presentation, and if I can find it, I will really put it in, the level of increase of labor productivity in the fossil fuel producing countries is significantly lower than the average productivity of countries like Morocco or Syria or Egypt. They have really been able to show that by being dependent on productive activities, they engender a great capacity to generate more productive employment. And these have really become the linchpin of what could be considered to be a diversified and a productive economy, an inclusive economy at that. If we were to really give these jobs to our youth, to our women, to the marginalized people, these large number of jobs that would be embedded into that transition is going to augur for a much better and a more productive future. And what's even more interesting is that we were able to bring two of the top economists of the world, Paul Collier and Ricardo Hausmann. And both have written profusely, on what the MENA region can do to exploit this newfound capacity. And they said that the best thing to do is to basically embrace global electrification. I mean, some have already estimated that our region can supply 50% of global electricity. And that all it takes is that there will be some way in which we can use our experience in exporting fossil fuel to start exporting renewable energy, or at least the products of renewable energy. So in this respect, the fossil fuel that was supposed to be an encumbrance and a difficulty could really now be leveraged so that we can extend our ability to export these. And already the region has proven its ability to create multiple cooperative agreements. I mean, to some extent now Morocco is thinking of exporting electricity not only to Spain, but also to England. And the UAE is already in cooperative agreements with India and Pakistan. And there are really quite a bit of opportunities here that once they are exploited, they can bring about a very strong major way. But these are necessary conditions. The existence of this wealth is necessary, but not sufficient. What we really need is to capitalize on this proximity to renewable energy that is needed now. We need to also exploit to make sure that, nobody now can produce more cheaply electricity using solar than we can. Like, imagine 1 single square kilometer in the desert would produce the equivalence of 2 million barrels of oil per year. And that is really a fundamental thing. But it's a potential. The issue is to what extent? What can we do? What should we do to make sure that this potential is realized and we're able to engender in our region the productive capacity to take advantage of this? And then we need to do a few things, one of which is, okay, we have cheap fossil fuel, but we need machinery, we need infrastructure, we need to invest, and the cost of capital is extremely high. In Morocco, it is 10 times what it is in Germany. And what we need to do is to make sure that we keep that capital cost low, so that whatever equipment, whatever infrastructure, whatever we need to erect can be done without engaging or bringing about incredible increases cost. I don't want to speak too long, so please let me. Okay, so the other thing is basically to manage technological risks. To a great extent, we need to adopt the technology. We need to innovate the technology. We need to make sure that our firms, the micro, small, and medium enterprise come into play. These are basically the leading agents of change and innovation. And we want to give them all the capacities, all the necessary skilled people, access to market, access to finance. So these micro and medium enterprises become very realistic and forefront of the development of our system. And they can do this in a number of ways. One of the most challenging things for us is how to integrate the informal economy. Our informal economy is extremely large. Our firms are more micro than medium. And the issue here is, what can we do? We need to integrate. We need to create the necessary structure and policies and mechanisms where we would integrate that informal economy. And if we do, it would mean a lot of important things. One, the grid is never into these areas. The micro enterprises will take this, they liberate the dependence on that grid, because they can go to the areas that are underserved. And they are really, in a way, as prosumers, we call them. They are consumer of energy, but they're also producer of energy. Because if they use solar, they can use it to themselves, and the extra they put on the grid. So if instead of being dependent on a grid that is not really capable of delivering this and has very high levels of loss in the transmission and extremely expensive to really build it in these remote areas, they give the chance of generating all the needed energy, because they are usually close to the area where it's consumed, and they do not have to depend in any substantive or necessary way on the grid. They alleviate really the shortages of grid, and they can deliver it in a decentralized manner to all the places that are needed and necessary. The other thing that is also important is that these micro enterprises, if you depend on them alone and do not really take the responsibility to create what Joseph Stiglitz has made a fantastic contribution. He was in the World Bank and the chief economist, and argued in a very persuasive way that we need to create clusters of firms. So these small firms can be brought together, not in a way to undermine competition, but to accentuate cooperation and see to what extent they can be dependent upon to deliver the social good that they could. And he drew the experience on the experience of the Asian tigers, and they drew on what some of the developed economies have used. They call them these anti-deflationary firms. That when the economies were contracting, they were worried about these small enterprises disappearing, brought them together, created the conditions where they could cooperate, gave them the facilities, provided the training, supported them with the financial necessities, and they withstood the recession and they were able to invigorate the economy. What we need here is we have to depend on these small enterprises. We have to give them the necessary conditions. We have to give them the supports that they would need. The interesting also thing is we need to price carbon. And to some extent, it's not on the books. Nobody is talking in our region that we should price carbon. Because if we have the desert and we can really sequester the carbon, that would be a great source of income for, and especially if we can use this in a way as a finance for the small and medium enterprise. What is also necessary here is to make sure that we do things in a way that create that transition to a productive, inclusive economy, and not to think of the transition to renewable energy as a pure technical issue of just replacing some fossil fuel by some renewable energy. Let's think of it as a social project to rebase our economies, to make them more productive, to make them more innovative, to make them more dynamic, to more inclusive in the way they will generate opportunities for the young, and to give the chance to women and youth and marginalized people a new chance so they can be integrated in the full responsibility of developing, expanding, and diversifying. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.
So I would like to jump on these final words of supporting or using this energy transition that results in a social transition to empower women and youth, as you just finished or terminated your speech with. Let me jump on that and tell you, well, first of all, Dr. Kubursi's research and report is available on the ERF website, and I would like to invite you to use it for your research, download it. It's a very comprehensive work with 2 case studies regarding Morocco and UAE. And this is for you and for our viewers online. And the second thing, for IDRC, one of our raison d'etre is to empower women and look at the youth. As Radia's research mentioned, that they are a very important proportion in the Arab world. And on that, let me tap into Professor Assaad's research interest, and I'll give the questions from right to left, okay? That's why I'm starting with you, just to follow the sitting order. You have done an extensive research on the MENA paradox, and the MENA paradox is a very interesting paradox, especially regarding women. So we've seen, and the number was mentioned, that we have 20% of female employment in the Arab world. It's a number that is the lowest in all regional components, and it's a number that has stagnated for 3 decades. On the other hand, we have one of the highest, if not the highest, STEM female percentage, higher even than the United States, of female in the engineering, technology, math in our population. So this is a what we call the MENA paradox. And my question to you is, how does your research tell us about the role of MSMEs in fostering this inclusive and equitable economic growth in this context of clean energy? Thank you. Thank you, Professor Assaad.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute to this very important project. First, I want to start by saying that, by thanking Dr. Kubursi for a very compelling presentation about this not being just a technical exercise in energy transition and energy modes, but as a social project that can transform the MENA region. And agree very strongly with the fact that there's no viable pathway to limiting global warming without this comprehensive transition, and that this region is particularly well positioned to take advantage of the opportunities that the transition presents. Now, on the MENA paradox, which is the fact that women in the region have really closed the gender gap in education, and in fact, many countries have exceeded men in the level of education that they've acquired, in particular in higher education. But despite that, we haven't seen a major increase in female labor force participation in most countries. There's possibly the exception of Saudi Arabia in recent years, but Saudi Arabia makes no data available for researchers to look at, so I have a big question mark about those numbers. But in any case, the labor force participation among women has stagnated, in fact has declined despite these major gains in education. And a good part of that is due to the fact that women have strongly preferred public sector employment, and the region has been moving away from public sector employment, possibly with the exception of the rich Gulf state who can still afford to have that. So we have a huge potential for women's employment, but not realized because of constraints in the labor market in terms of providing jobs that women and their families and their social circles find acceptable in the private sector. Now, I've also done some studies of what are the green jobs that are exist in the region and the ones that are potentially going to be created by a transition both in the renewable energy sector but also in the broader green transition. And the bad news is that these jobs are not very feminized. These jobs are predominantly male jobs, and they are in construction, in installation, in technical fields, in engineering. And for the most part, women are underrepresented in these so-called green jobs. The good news is that these green jobs, as identified by occupations that are likely to grow in the green transition, are growing much faster than other jobs in the economy. So we're talking about rates of growth of what are called jobs with high green task intensity or very high green task intensity, growing at 3 times or 4 times faster than the overall employment growth. And many of these jobs are involved in energy, in green renewable energy production. And so this is what we're called the production-oriented, based on the product of the job. But many are also involved in green processes, things like energy efficiency. And in fact, nearly 2/5 of these jobs can be thought of as both production and processes. In fact, I want to plug a recent paper done as an ERF working paper based on the results of the Egypt Labor Market Panel Survey of 2023 by Dr. Hala Abu Ali and Dr. Mona Amer, which estimates the share of jobs in green activities in Egypt based on a set of questions associated with the green production and processes involved in these jobs. And they show that almost 7.8% of total employment in Egypt is involved directly in these either production or processes in green activities. And that, in fact, 40% of these are directly involved in renewable energy, and another 30% are involved in energy efficiency. So we're talking about a pretty large fraction of jobs. In fact, significantly larger in terms of percentage of total employment and what the report estimates. Because if I take the jobs that the report estimates as direct, indirect, and energy efficiency related jobs and relate them to the Egyptian total employment, it's about 1%. So we're talking about significantly more than that, empirically proven to be related to these things. Another study, which also was published recently by ERF and GIZ, which I was involved in, that identify green occupations in Egypt based on task intensity. The one I was mentioning earlier shows that somewhere between 10 and 15% of total employment is in occupations that have either very high green intensity or high green intensity. So we're talking about a very important potential for job creation. Unfortunately, the bad news is that currently, under current existing patterns of employment, these jobs are not highly feminized. Some of these classifications do show that some sectors, like for instance, digital economy jobs, which are related to the green transition, are very feminized. And so these are potential areas of important growth for female employment. Some jobs have to do with more planning and processes and policy implementation also tend to be more feminized, but the installation jobs, the engineering jobs, the kind of the skilled vocational jobs currently are not strongly occupied by women. Now, let me just say one more thing, is that clearly, the green transition has this potential, as Dr. Kubursi said, but to be able to realize this potential, we have to have a very important skilling and program to be able to prepare the next generation of youth to take up these jobs, which tend to be skilled jobs for the most part, for both men and women who are thinking of entering this. And currently, if you look, and also, of course, there's an aspect of reskilling to ensure that the people who will be displaced in fossil fuel industries can be reskilled to be able to have a just transition and not pay the cost of this transition. But if you look at, for instance, in the case of Egypt, where institutionally the job of doing the skilling and reskilling within the government bureaucracy is located, the people who are thinking and anticipating what the green transition will create in terms of labor demand, in terms of needs for skills, it's hard to identify. I mean, there is some work being done in the Ministry of Education and Technical Education to prepare the incoming young people for some of these jobs, but it's really very incomplete. They don't really have the capacity of being able to anticipate where the growth is going to be in terms of this employment. And then the other agencies that are involved in the green transition in terms of nationally determined contribution, like ministries of electricity, ministries of environment, have no employment mandate whatsoever. And they're not worrying about the employment side. So there is a gap institutionally about where this preparation of the future workforce for the green transition and who's going to do it within the institutional framework of government, which is something that needs to be corrected.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Assaad. I will turn now to Professor Bipasha Barua. So your current research aims to understand how to ensure that global low-carbon economy will be more gender equitable and socially socially just than its fossil fuel-based equivalent, or predecessor, we should say. So my question to you is the following. In a recent op-ed, you mentioned that women represent 32% of the global clean energy workforce, but only 28% of clean energy jobs that require science, technology, engineering, and math, what we call STEM training. So you mentioned this is a problem, but also an opportunity. So the question that is before us, how can this opportunity materialize itself in the case of these micro, small, and medium enterprises in the MENA region? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this forum. What I have to say is actually quite complimentary for what Dr. Assaad has already said. When I think of barriers and opportunities, I always say the line between them is very fuzzy, in the sense that something that's a barrier can become an opportunity if you change certain policies and also change social attitudes and norms, right? So it's very difficult to classify things as one or the other. They're quite fuzzy. We can move quite nicely between them. We've already mentioned that women's and girls' education has been extremely successful in the MENA region, and that women and girls outperform, in many cases, boys and men at all levels of education. Now, this is true also for STEM degrees and for TVET, which is technical and vocational education and training. Last year, a new global education monitoring report was published by UNESCO. Some of you may have read it. It was called Technology on Her Terms. And I was invited by the Times Higher Education Supplement to comment on it. And the things that really stood out to me from that were that in the period between 2018 and 2023, only 35% of STEM graduates globally were women, but in 9 of the 122 countries that were reported in the study, and notably Arab states such as the Syrian Arab Republic and Tunisia, more than 50% of STEM graduates were women. The same report noted that in Morocco now it's 49% of STEM graduates are women, so practically 50. Other things were very interested. For every 100 young men with information and communications technology skills in Egypt, there were 117 women with comparable skills. So these are all great things. The other thing that I found fascinating was that around the world, there were only 3 countries and Cambodia. So the 3 were Jordan, Palestine, and Saudi Arabia, and Cambodia were the only countries where there was no gender gap in mathematics anxiety about doing mathematics, right? Ironically, the biggest gaps were in Denmark, France, Germany, and Norway. So when we have findings like this, of course, we understand that there are also big generational differences in these things. So as an example, in Tunisia, women who are 20 to 24 are 4 times more likely to have ICT, information and communication technology skills, than women who are older, say 40 to 50 or 40 to 44 was the group that was reported. Similarly, we know that poor and rural households have consistently more challenges, and this is true for boys and men as well in the rural context. So it's interesting because these enormous advancements have been achieved, and sometimes ironically through gender segregated education. So that's very important to note as well, because that's often thought of as something that is perhaps not as progressive, in the sense that I'm actually at Western University. We had a women's only college, Brescia, which is now integrating with us, with our university, because the idea of an only women's college is deemed so outdated in Canada, right? It clearly serves its benefits. So I've actually been a proponent of that for a long time. So it's very obvious that in MENA countries, the challenge is not education, it's employment. So education, women are doing exceedingly well. So I think sometimes it's a matter of understanding barriers and opportunities along the career cycle. It's not enough just to look at recruitment. We also have to think about how do people stay in their jobs, how do they advance, how are they promoted. So it's like the idea of the career cycle, not enough time to go into it in detail, is really, really important. The other piece I find that is very hopeful for me is in the regional report that Dr. Kubursi produced, he mentioned the importance of aligning better alignment between academic institutions to provide skills and training and the renewable energy sector, that they're out of whack in a sense, they don't quite complement each other. Now this I found to be very true because I did a study a couple of years ago looking globally at entry points into the renewable energy sector. And one of the biggest ones was the lack of awareness of opportunity. So the lack of awareness of the energy sector itself among women and girls was much higher. And this is not a conspiracy against women and girls. It's just that the oil and gas sector was very male-dominated, so there were more men in it. And some of the biggest transitions are happening for people who are workers in oil and gas because they know that the writing is on the wall, right? So they've been moving out into renewables. So the knowledge is also being transferred in that direction. You have a male workforce here, so that knowledge is transmitting along those lines. So we have to change that. So that's a very specific policy recommendation, that how women acquire knowledge can be changed. So if you think of the work of organizations like Women in Clean Energy, Renew, MENA, there are these groups that now advocate for increasing the number of women in the sector. They're doing a wonderful job of changing that, of providing information at par to girls and women. There's also a lot of misperception of the type of work involved in the energy sector. If you ask someone working in the energy sector, the idea is immediately like maybe an engineer, maybe a research scientist. So those are the things that people think of. Just as if you ask people what is a job in mining like, they'll probably tell you it's somebody going down a mine shaft with a lamp on their head. Although that is kind of a stereotype from more than 100 years ago. You can contribute, work in many different jobs, including people with disabilities in the mining sector today. So I think that's very important, the misperception of the type of work involved. And also a lack of awareness of the range and versatility in employment in renewable energy. That it's possible to move between sectors within a specific technology and also across. So that part is very, very important. The other piece is the definition of green jobs. I find that, for now, the definition of green jobs, and I understand it, is quite limited, for the sectors that you just mentioned. But there are other fields. So for me, the very specific ones, law, public policy and administration, finance, business management, economics, information technology, that can very clearly provide employment. You can be employed in the renewable energy sector with these jobs, and they're wonderful employment opportunities. So things like policy, project planning, communications, if these academic programs were better aligned with the renewable energy sector. So here again, I also looked at what are the entry points for women, or for anyone, into these sectors. Things like, for example, internships, cooperative programs, where you complement academic learning with work experience is really important. That's a very, very good entry point. When I looked at these, I found that when I looked at how are these fields aligned, for renewable energy, they were primarily drawing from people in engineering, environmental science, and geology, interestingly. So the other fields, law, public policy, finance, were not aligned at all with internships and things like cooperative, co-op programs, right? So that is a very clear, again, recommendation that they should be better aligned. The people who are ending up in the renewable energy sector from, say, law or public policy, it's by accident. It's not by design. So that can be changed. It can be by design rather than by accident. So I think that's really important, and that would make also a big difference. And finally, I'm going to stop right here. You could keep me here all day. It's not fair. So apprenticeships, right? The other field is people have jobs that are not necessarily STEM, but they're non-STEM technical jobs. So installing wind turbines, solar energy systems installer, electrician, energy auditor, retrofitting, for example. So these things, they draw workers through apprenticeships. The idea is that you have to apprentice for someone. And apprenticeships globally are very unregulated and very sort of informal. People hire who they know, who they like, to the point that in one study, I asked someone, why were you unable to get an apprenticeship? And she said, because I don't have access to the FBI network. And I thought, what is the FBI network? And she said, friends, brothers, and in-laws. So the idea that is very, very, it's very, informal and unregulated. So again, that can be changed. That can be changed through funding, through tax incentives. There are many ways of changing that. So very specific ways by which, we can change that dynamic and create more opportunities for women, for people with disabilities, for a much more diverse workforce. And that's why I am very positive about all of this.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Natasha. Thank you for that insight, Professor Barua. So my last question is for Dr. Yusra Saker. So I would like to say that she's a senior energy specialist at the World Bank. So we're going to have a perspective from institutions, World Bank institutions, working on the MENA region. Yusra led engagement including on green hydrogen, oil and gas, decarbonization, methane abatement, carbon capture and storage, along with regional energy integration. And I think you recently attended the COP29, if I'm not wrong, in Baku. So in the sake of cross-learning and cross-pollination, we would like to understand from your attending the panel on empowering women to powering change, gender equality as a catalyst for just energy transition. What learning and best practices can you share with us from that regional or from that event regarding MSMEs? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, actually. Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure, of course. Yes, let me start by your question and then maybe reflect on more background. I participated in the UFM, Union for Mediterranean panel held in COP29. Actually, my participation was virtual. Unfortunately, I had other family commitments, so I didn't attend physically. But actually, the COP29 and this session and many other engagements bring the fact that there is a lot that is being done in supporting women participation in the energy sector, especially under energy transition. Every transition comes with opportunities and comes with challenges or vulnerabilities that need to be addressed, of course. So starting by that panel, I actually had wonderful panelists among, I joined that wonderful panel on the efforts that are being done on supporting women participation. My participation actually was to introduce what we are doing. I'm honored to be, in addition to my technical work as an energy specialist in the World Bank. I'm part of the World Bank MENA team, Middle East and North Africa, working on different countries, Egypt and others, on electricity, oil and gas, and sometimes mining as well. But in a parallel line in that, under the corporate priorities of the World Bank to keep gender focus on all activities in all countries. I'm honored also to be leading the what we call Renew MENA, the regional network in energy for women, which I'm very happy that you have mentioned. Very kind of you. Actually, the regional network in energy for women is a network that was established in the World Bank in late 2022, and its objective is to support women participation in the energy sector. Our engagement as a World Bank in different countries through our operations is sort of, we deal with governments. We have our sister organization, IFC, which deals with private sector. But these are very important engagements, but they are in form of projects. They have a start, they have an end, they have a team, that's it. But our soft part under Renew MENA is a soft part of the engagement that we want to be, to change the region and to be owned by the region. So we have established the Renew MENA as a networking, professional networking in MENA region. We have another sister network in Asia called We Power, and a third one in Africa called One Africa, aiming for the same objective. And we want this to be held by the region, to be owned by the region, not to be subject to the World Bank engagement all the time, but we are facilitating it, and we have launched it, and we are doing actually work that I'm personally very proud of. By the way, yesterday we had a region, let me first introduce what's Renew MENA. Renew MENA supports women participation in the energy sector through three main pillars. One of them is facilitating the transition from education to work, because we have also a lot of numbers, figures that we have heard today, and I can second that according to our studies, MENA region has 53% of STEM educated among females, while when it comes to work, it's 35%. It's good to note that the 53% is above the OECD average. So MENA region is exceeding the OECD average, while when it comes to work, it's 35 only, which is below the OECD average. That means there are leakage. There's leakage, and there are barriers that we need to address. Though this is a lost opportunity, because these females have the mental capabilities to study such kind of education. They were invested in by their families and by their countries. They are being invested in to have such education, and then they are not utilized. This doesn't come into a job. And more sad that even those who join the energy fields, at most of the time, or at big part of the time, don't go to technical jobs, but administrative jobs and jobs that are not really utilizing the education that they have received. So this is a lost opportunity that we want to address. This was our first pillar, facilitate the transition from education to work. The second pillar is also reflecting on one point that was mentioned today, is the retention and career advancement of those who already join. It's not enough that they join and stay at the low level of the jobs or leave after some time. Because this is again a lost opportunity after they gain some experience in the field, and then they leave to get married and to have children and things like that, and they are not allowed to get back to work in a way that is convenient to their family commitments. So we are also supporting having the HR policies in place, and all the ecosystem that is inducive for females to keep the jobs in energy field. The third pillar is supporting entrepreneurship, because if we're talking about, as also was mentioned today, one very striking idea is that even women who are working in energy in MENA region are in public sector. That's why it's now declining. So if you're talking about private sector, it's not only private sector, but entrepreneurship that would create jobs and would utilize innovation. So, and entrepreneurship, as we all know, entrepreneurship by itself as a topic is not an easy task in MENA region. So when you add another difficulty level of having it for women, this is another level, and when you add another third layer of having it in energy, that's way more level to address. And talking about this point specifically, there are some misperceptions or stereotypes that need to be addressed, because there is that perception that energy jobs and energy business is heavy business, is heavy investment, and while it's not true, there is a lot with every, it doesn't need to be a multi-billion-dollar project to have a power plant or wind farm or things like that. There are plenty of jobs that can be done under the energy transition that can capitalize on innovation, on startups, on entrepreneurship, and can be led by women and entrepreneurs. For example, we always focus on renewable energy, which is good, but there is a lost component, which is the energy efficiency. There are multiple of energy efficiency that has service providers that can open new opportunities for jobs. There are also, even in renewable energy, there are a lot of feed industries and opportunities for feeding these jobs and services. Another part is it's not only STEM when we talk about energy transition jobs. When we need to do a lot of reskilling and upskilling in our normal jobs. For example, when you go to banks and financing institutes, you need to ensure the people working in financing field are well trained to address financing renewable energy and address innovative or startups. all of these angles or aspects are missing, and there's a lot to be done actually on all of these variant different aspects. However, there are a lot of examples that maybe not everyone knows about. For example, in our yesterday's session that we had under the Egypt chapter, Renew MENA is existing in the full MENA region, but we started to also develop country chapters in countries where we have large footprint, big number of partners. Our partners, by the way, are public entities, private sector entities, entrepreneurs, and academia, a lot of academia and universities. For example, we have from our partners the Ministry of Energy in Jordan, we have the electricity transmission company in Egypt, we have Infinity Power, of course, reputable renewable energy firm, private sector. We have a lot of universities, the Arab Academy for Science and Technology, we have German University, we have Ain Shams University, we have a lot, and in many countries as well. Morocco, Tunisia, a lot. So one of yesterday's event was done by Egypt chapter here in Egypt, and we had an example of two entrepreneurs, female entrepreneurs, in fields that are really, really amazing. One of them was a geologist who worked for a few years in a company, and then she found an opportunity, a gap in the market that is there. There's a lot of geological data that are take a lot of capital to bring, and then they're not utilized after the firm goes into exploration. And she decided to have a company to establish this digital solutions company to utilize all the geological data, and she expanded, and she presented her journey. She's like 40s, early 40s lady, and now she is leading a group of companies in multiple countries in Egypt and Africa and many and in the Middle East. So this is kind of business that they have the perception that it's a big business, but it's not. Another one is also a chairperson for a company that has worked on pressure reduction stations for gas networks. I don't want to take a lot of time. So there are a lot of examples. Our role, part of our activities in Renew MENA is that we shed light on those examples. We have awards, because we need to show those role models, because this is the best thing to do, to show the families, to show the to break the stereotypes that when you show successful female figures, because they are worthy, not because they are female. Yani we celebrated, yani they need to acquire the jobs based on worthiness, not on merit, not on gender basis. And this actually shows the model for young females to enroll into the sector, and also breaks the stereotypes of business owners and financing institutes that yes, you can lend a woman, yes, you can support a project run or led by a woman. One last thing that I want to say also is that we have our internship program that we, in collaboration with the utilities that we have in different countries, we have internship program where we get dual internship between for female fresh graduates or in the last year in university to have internship period in the utility of their country and in the World Bank. I'll stop here not to take much time. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusra, for your valuable insight. It's very valuable. I'm impressed. Now, we had so much information. I'm sure you have questions that you would like to ask.
They're more of comments actually than they are questions. One is in investigating the profile of MSME in the rich and poor Arab countries, we found that the FATO and ATO are too high. This could be attributed to financing of FA and lack of innovation. Not sure if this is a question or a comment. The second one is time has come to build strong relations between venture creation and non-conventional finance and innovation if we want to develop small business sector in the MENA region.
I mean, this is an excellent question, and one that needs to really deal with it. First, these are two small enterprises, probably do not have access to finance or generate sufficient finance from their operations to undertake the responsibility and the cost, especially the front end cost in terms of equipment and to sustain innovation things. But this is where I think we need to add the other aspects. First, the government has a real responsibility. I mean, one of the most interesting aspects about why we are really concerned about micro, small, middle, is because in our economies, the government is too bloated. And to a great extent, unfortunately, it has frustrated and has suppressed the private sector. Or if there was a private sector, it was crony capitalism in the sense that the closer you are to the state, the more likely to succeed. We needed basically to decouple, to separate. And one of the most challenging, but one of the most promising things is to the extent to which we can get some finance for the micro and small enterprises that does not depend on the government. And one of this is pricing of carbon, the one we were talking about. The other thing is there is all these international programs, loss and damage, that I think COP has created. Why on earth we have not been on the forefront trying to get this? We are on the receiving end. We are going to suffer incredible losses and damages. And this should really give us a chance to access these funds. And there is no better institution or group that could make best these resources than the micro and middle enterprises.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khaled. You mentioned a first hand, and Dr. Ibrahim al-Badawi's had his first hand up, so if we can give him the floor. Dr. Ibrahim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yasmin, and thank you, Dr. Khaled, and the Dr. Atif and the group, the moderator, the panelists. I want actually to, I was planning, in fact, I am planning to, in the closing session tomorrow, to say something about the macroeconomics of climate change, because I think that's an area that is very strongly, in need for, it's a huge lacuna, and it has implications for the potential of the medium and macro enterprises in renewable energy. And that's actually particularly relevant, the concern for the oil populous economies of the MENA region, and of course, as well as other low-income countries and middle-income countries. What is happening now is that these countries are not, countries like, say, for example, Algeria or Yemen or Syria or Sudan, when it recovers from the current war, they have to face the problem that actually most of their exports are leveraged exports from the perspective of the energy transition. That eventually, as Professor Atif said, this will be stranded assets. So from the perspective of macro, the ratio of the non-leveraged export, which are the exports that are not associated with the non-renewable energy exports, oil in this case in particular, but also gas or even some minerals, will have to be significantly reduced, which will mean that there will have to be adjustment of the current account deficit, and their consequence also fiscal policy and especially exchange rate policy will have to adjust. So rather than waiting for for the eventual impact big time when it happens, countries have to start preparing in terms of repositioning themselves, in terms of economic diversification, in terms of in the current account accounting, to actually discount the revenues from the oil and other non-renewable resources, so that they actually prepare themselves. And I think discussing this aspect and analyzing it would be very important and complementary to the micro approach of trying to create conditions for the firms in order to respond to the need of the decarbonization at the micro and meso level. And I think this would be an important point, similar to some extent. In fact, it constitutes the most extreme case of what is known in the macroeconomic literature as the sudden stops. And these are the phenomena that affected countries that depended on capital inflows. And then suddenly these capital inflows, for various reasons, stop. And when they stop, these countries face major readjustment and create major crises at the macroeconomic level, at the level of the fiscal, exchange rate, and also current account. So I think this is a dimension that I think would be very important to start thinking about. And we at the ARF, hope that we can actually combine our efforts with partners like IDRC and others to continue the work on this particular area. Thank you very much.
Okay, message received. So we will integrate that in our potential projects with you. Yasmin, how are we doing with time? We should wrap up? Okay. So please join me in thanking the panel with an excellent presentation, a lot of learnings for all of us, Professor Kubursi, Professor Assaad, Professor Baroua, and Dr. Sakir. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking them.